They say some evenings begin as nothing special, just another line in an ordinary day, and somehow turn into the moments that stay with you forever. That night at the office was supposed to be routine, a few reports to finish before heading home. But when David appeared beside my desk after everyone else had gone, something in the air shifted. Quietly, yet unmistakably. He stood there, calm as always, tall and steady beneath the soft lights. "Clara, could you stay a bit longer? There's something I'd like to go over with you," he said, his voice steady but softer than usual. I hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was past 6, and all I wanted was to slip into my robe, make a cup of chamomile, and let the day fade away. But there was a warmth in his tone, something that made it impossible to say no. "Of course," I heard myself reply. As the last footsteps disappeared down the hallway, the silence that followed felt almost alive. The hum of the heating system filled the space, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. David's office door was open, the blinds half drawn, strips of city light spilling across the polished desk. He gestured for me to join him. "I wanted to go over your proposal," he said, closing the door behind me. "Not secretive, just private. You've been putting in a lot of work lately. It deserves more than a rushed glance." His words carried a sincerity that softened the formality between us. I sat down, smoothing my skirt over my knees, my pulse steady but alert. We started with numbers, projections, and timelines. But after a while, the conversation drifted, as conversations sometimes do when two people forget the world outside the room. He asked about my weekend plans, then about Ethan, my son who'd recently moved out of state. There was an ease in his voice, the kind that invites honesty. As he listened, leaning slightly forward, I noticed the small details I'd never really seen before. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the calm focus in his gaze. It wasn't the way a boss looks at an employee. It was quieter, deeper. For the first time, I felt seen. Not for what I did, but for who I was. At one point, I laughed at something he said, a story from his early years in the company. And he smiled in that slow, deliberate way of his, the kind that lingers in the air like warmth after sunlight. We kept talking, about work, about life, about how time seems to slip by unnoticed when you're too busy being responsible. When I finally glanced at the clock again, it was nearly 8. I rose, surprised at how easily the hours had passed. The office beyond his glass wall was dim and still, the city outside alive in soft motion. "Thank you for staying," David said quietly as I gathered my papers. "It means more than you know." I smiled faintly. I didn't mind. As I stepped out into the hallway, I heard the door close gently behind me. The air outside his office felt different, charged somehow, like the space between one breath and the next. I told myself it was just a conversation, that nothing had changed. But when I lay in bed that night, every word, every glance replayed in my mind like a song I couldn't stop hearing. I remembered the warmth in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes, the way the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that it was simply admiration for someone who led with quiet strength. But somewhere deep inside, I already knew better. Something had shifted, gently but undeniably. The next morning, the office felt different. Maybe it was just me. The hum of printers, the soft tapping of keyboards, all the familiar sounds seemed muted under a strange awareness. When David walked in, coffee in hand, his eyes found mine for the briefest moment. A nod, a hint of a smile, and then he disappeared into his office. But the warmth in that small exchange lingered far longer than it should have. I tried to focus on work, on deadlines, on the comfort of routine. Yet between lines of data and carefully worded emails, his voice kept echoing in my thoughts. That steady calm, the way he said my name, it wasn't romantic yet, not really. It was something quieter, more dangerous. Connection in its earliest form. Later that day, when his assistant appeared at my desk with a small note, "David would like to see you in his office when you're free," I felt that same strange pull again, the one I'd tried to ignore. I folded the note carefully, pretending my hands weren't trembling. As I stood outside his glass door, I caught sight of him through the reflection of the city lights. Calm, collected, unaware of the quiet storm forming in me. I took a breath and reached for the handle. Something told me this was only the beginning. David looked up when I stepped into his office, the late afternoon light soft against the glass walls. "Clara," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him instead of the one across the desk. It was a small gesture, but it changed everything. The space suddenly felt shared, intimate. "I was thinking about your proposal last night," he said, tapping a folder with his pen. "Your insights were sharper than you realize." The compliment caught me off guard. I smiled, unsure how to respond. "I'm glad it was useful." He studied me for a moment, a faint curve to his lips. "You have a way of seeing things differently, not just in work. In life, too." His tone wasn't flirtatious. It was thoughtful, genuine, but still something in me stirred. I looked away, pretending to adjust the papers in my lap, and felt the warmth rise in my chest. We went through numbers again, though neither of us seemed fully present in them. Every few minutes our conversation strayed, to travel, to books, to music. He told me he'd taken piano lessons years ago but never found the time to continue. I admitted I'd once painted for the same reason. We laughed at our shared excuses. When his hand brushed the edge of my chair as he reached for a document, I felt it like a pulse. Accidental, fleeting, but enough to make my breath hitch. He didn't acknowledge it, and neither did I. Still, the space between us grew smaller with every minute. By late afternoon, he leaned back and sighed. "The air in here is too heavy," he said with a faint grin. "Let's take a walk." "My treat, coffee?" The question was casual, but the look that followed wasn't. I nodded, and we left together. The office behind us fading into the soft hum of the city. The cafe was a few blocks away, tucked beneath an old brick building, the kind of place where the lights are warm, and the smell of roasted beans settles around you like a blanket. He ordered for both of us, a cappuccino for me, a black coffee for himself. I smiled when he remembered. We sat by the window, the city outside glimmering beneath the drizzle. For the first few minutes, we talked about harmless things. Books we'd half finished, the comfort of quiet mornings. Then the conversation deepened without either of us meaning it to. He asked about my first years in the city, how I'd managed raising Ethan while balancing work. I told him honestly, about the sleepless nights, the guilt, the small victories that no one else saw. He listened without interrupting, his gaze steady, kind. There was no judgment, only attention. It felt strange and safe all at once. Then he told me something I hadn't expected, a story from his past about a decision he regretted, one that had cost him someone he cared about deeply. His voice softened as he spoke, and I realized how rare it was to hear vulnerability from a man like him. The moment stretched quietly between us, gentle and raw. "You know," I said softly, "people always talk about second chances like they're waiting somewhere, but maybe they only show up when we stop expecting them." He looked at me for a long moment, and then nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Maybe you're right." When we left the cafe, the rain had eased into a mist, and the streets glowed gold under the streetlights. We didn't hurry back. His hand brushed mine once as we crossed the street. Light, accidental, yet deliberate in its hesitation. I didn't pull away. Back at the building, he held the door for me, his hand resting lightly on my back as I passed through. A simple gesture, but I felt it long after. The warmth of it followed me up to my desk, into the silence that met us once again as the office emptied for the night. Later, as I gathered my things, David appeared at the edge of my workspace, just as he had that first evening. "Clara," he said quietly, "would you mind staying a little longer?" I didn't even pretend to hesitate this time. Of course, he didn't go to his office. Instead, he leaned against the wall near my desk, his sleeves rolled up, his expression calm but unreadable. We spoke about the proposal for a while. Though neither of us seemed to care about deadlines anymore, the conversation drifted, to music, to memories, to the kind of nostalgia that pulls two people closer without a single deliberate move. "I used to love old jazz," I said. "My mother played it every Sunday morning. He smiled. That explains your calm. Jazz people never rush. Maybe, I laughed. Or maybe we just pretend better. He chuckled softly, his eyes catching mine in a way that silenced the air between us. For a moment, no words were needed, just that quiet, magnetic stillness. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the elevator. We stood side by side, the city lights reflecting against the glass walls. Neither of us pressed the button. The pause was heavy, not uncomfortable, but full. His eyes met mine, searching. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, breaking whatever had been holding us still. I stepped inside, my pulse steady but trembling somewhere deeper. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of him standing there, hands in his pockets, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. And for the first time, I didn't try to make sense of what I was feeling. I just let it be. The following week moved in slow, deliberate rhythm. The meetings, the calls, the coffee runs, everything looked ordinary on the surface. But underneath it all was that quiet pulse between us, steady and unspoken. Whenever David and I crossed paths, something invisible passed through the air, a glance that lingered a moment too long, a tone softer than it needed to be. By Wednesday afternoon, a storm rolled in. The sky dimmed to gray, rain tapping against the tall windows of the office. Most people packed up early, eager to escape the weather. I stayed behind, finishing one last report. The floor was nearly silent except for the hum of the heating system and the distant sound of rain. When I looked up, David was standing in the doorway of his office, his expression unreadable yet calm. "You're still here," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "Same as you." He walked closer, the soft thud of his steps barely breaking the quiet. "The rain's not letting up," he said. "How about we call it a night?" He paused, then added, almost casually, "Unless you don't mind a drink before heading home." It wasn't the first time colleagues had gone out after work, but the way he said it, measured, careful, made it feel different. I nodded. A drink sounds nice. We ended up in a small lounge 2 blocks away, tucked behind an old brick facade. The lighting was warm, golden, the kind that softened everything it touched. The sound of low jazz drifted through the air, and for a moment I thought of the conversation we'd had about Sunday mornings and music that never rushed. David ordered a glass of red wine for me without asking, remembering my choice from a company dinner months ago. He took his whiskey neat. When the drinks arrived, we clinked glasses softly, the sound swallowed by the room's hush. We talked for a long time, though I can't remember everything we said. Some parts were light, travel, books, memories. Others were quieter, more personal. He told me about the places he wanted to see but never did, about the things he wished he'd said to certain people before it was too late. His voice had that same warmth it always did, but there was something beneath it this time, an honesty, almost tender in its restraint. I told him about the garden I kept at home, how pruning roses helped me think, how silence sometimes felt like company rather than loneliness. He smiled. "That sounds peaceful," he said. "It is," I replied, "but it's also empty sometimes." He didn't respond right away, just watched me, eyes thoughtful, as if weighing something unseen. "You know," he said finally, "you have this way of making people feel like they can tell you anything." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that what you're doing right now?" His smile deepened, slow and deliberate. Maybe time slipped away unnoticed. The rain softened to a mist outside, and the lounge slowly emptied until only a few voices murmured in the background. When we finally stood to leave, the air outside was cool and clean, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement. He walked me to my car, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles at our feet. Our hands brushed once, and even through the chill of the night, that single touch felt warm. We paused by my car, neither of us quite ready to say goodnight. "Thank you for tonight," I said softly. He looked at me, his expression open, almost tender. "No, Clara, thank you." The simplicity of his words lingered. I drove home slowly, the windshield wipers keeping time with the thoughts I couldn't quiet. I knew then that what had begun between us wasn't something I could tuck neatly away. It had grown roots in silence and understanding, not passion or impulse, and that made it even harder to ignore. That weekend, I found myself thinking of him more than I wanted to admit. Not about the words we'd said, but about the quiet spaces between them, the way his gaze had softened when I spoke, the way his voice lowered when he said my name. It wasn't infatuation, it was connection, quiet, deliberate, real. By Monday morning, I knew something had to shift. The tension had become a quiet ache, beautiful and heavy. When he asked me to step into his office that afternoon, I sensed what was coming before he even spoke. He didn't sit at his desk. Instead, he gestured toward the small seating area by the window where the city stretched out in muted gold light. I took a seat across from him, the air between us calm, but charged. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he began softly. "Not about work, about us." The word hung in the air, fragile and unspoken until now. My heart beat faster, but I didn't look away. He leaned forward slightly. "I know we haven't said it out loud, but there's been something between us. I've felt it. I think you have too." There was no point pretending. "Yes," I said quietly. He nodded, relief and uncertainty mixing in his expression. "I value what we have here, our trust, the way we work together. I don't want to risk that, but I also don't want to ignore what's been growing between us." We sat in silence for a moment, the soft tick of the wall clock filling the room. Then I spoke. "I wasn't looking for this. I didn't come here expecting connection. But it's here, and it's real." His gaze softened. "Then maybe we don't have to label it. Maybe we just acknowledge it and respect it." Something in me eased at his words. It wasn't a declaration. It was understanding. Quiet, honest, and grown from the same stillness that had brought us here. When I rose to leave, he walked me to the door. "Clara," he said softly, "I'm glad you stayed that night. It changed something for me." I paused, hand on the doorframe, heart steady but full. "For me too." The elevator ride down felt lighter, not because everything had been resolved, but because nothing was hidden anymore. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how rare it is to meet someone who listens without judgment, who sees you without expectation. What had started as a quiet evening after work had turned into something tender and real. Not loud, not dramatic, just human. And as I drifted into sleep, I found comfort in the thought that whatever came next, I'd face it with my eyes and my heart wide open. If you've ever felt a connection you couldn't explain, one that started quietly and changed you in ways you never expected, share this story. Someone out there might need to be reminded that even the softest moments can shape a life,